What are the 5 keys to optimal health? And you're going through, and if the questions are provided for you, that's wonderful in the beginning, or they're provided to you at the end. Like, one of the most basic strategies, if you want to help people who take, standardized tests, especially your students in your life, is if you're taking something like the SAT and there's a reading comprehension portion of it, then what you want to be able to do is read the questions at the end first. Like, why would you go through and read 3 or 4 pages of reading comprehension that you know you're going to be tested on to get to the end to see the questions and then have the questions absolutely no relation to what you just learned? Why not ask those questions first so you know what the author believes is important, so when you're reading with purpose? Okay. Now, if the questions are not provided in the beginning or the end of the chapter in a textbook, certainly they might be, or some of the business books or health books that you might read might provide those, then can you go through the chapter and turn certain things into questions? Can you go through and look at the subheads of some of the chapters and just add a what is or how does? Can you turn any of the vocabulary words that you came across and turn those into questions? What does XYZ mean? Or what are the XYZ of this? And so you're going through and you're sensitizing yourself to a number of questions. And notice you have not even read anything yet. Okay? The next thing that you want to do, D, is to organize the chapter. You want to organize the chapter. Now, what I mean by that, as I'm talking to you and we're coaching each other through this process, is part of what you're learning is content, but part of it also is the context or the framework or the organization that the author is providing you, right? And so, where in the book do they provide for you the structure of the information in terms of how it's organized? It's usually where? Usually in the table of contents, right? In the table of contents. So what I want you to do for D in terms of organizing is I want you to go through the table of contents and I want you to just look and kind of organize that information. Now, what might help is actually to take notes, and if you notice you're going through a chapter, right, you're going to the table of contents in the front of the book and you're seeing the different topics that are covered in that chapter 8, for example. Now, if they happen to organize, sometimes it just says chapter 8 this, but if they'll actually list and organize these different subchapters underneath chapter 8, what you're going to do is you're going to go and write those down. You're going to write those down and just kind of organize, see how that information is being organized in your specific book. Now, if we were to do this in your mind's eye, okay, in your imagination, let's take a book. Maybe if you want to organize it the same way in quadrants, you certainly could do that. If you're familiar with mind mapping, and you've gone through our, our quick thinking program, you could certainly mind map this as well. But I'll give you an example in your mind, okay, that you could do, because I want you to draw on the screen of your mind. And this is a good exercise, so I'm purposely not going to put this on the screen. I want you to imagine in front of you that you have a blank slate, and in the middle, let's say we're going to mind map this, or radiant thinking, or the different ways of capturing information. But I'm just going to imagine right in the middle, we're going to put the word health. Right in the center of the page, you have something called health, and you write the word health and you circle it. Okay. Now, stemming, radiating out of this word are going to be the core elements to health. Okay. Now, if it helps for you to think about it in quadrants, then do that. Okay, so imagine, put them right in the middle of it, just like where we're doing, when we're recording and taking notes about what we read. Imagine in the middle you have this word, you see a horizontal axis and a vertical axis, right? A line down the middle of the page and a line left and right through the center of the page also. So you have 4 boxes. And imagine right in the center you have a circle, and you draw inside the circle health. And now imagine in the quadrants, right, that you have the top left, the top right, the bottom left. Imagine those are quadrants also. So cut those into 4s. And I want you to imagine in the main quadrant, it's called health. And if you're drawing this, sketching this out, in the top left, right, and the bottom right, bottom left, I want you to tell me what the 4 elements to health would be. What would the 4 elements for you to be healthy? What do you think would those would be? This would be an example of taking notes and organizing a chapter. So let's say one of them is, let's say, exercise. Exercise. That would be a core, what I would say, it would be a core principle, a pathway to power, if you will, for being healthy. You need to be able to exercise. So imagine right now you're zooming in on the top left quadrant, and that has 4 quadrants, right? And in the middle of that, you have exercise. You have exercise. And then imagine radiating out there, you have 4 quadrants there. And what would be 4 things that you would do? I'm just picking 4 as a random, number, but we tend to remember things sometimes in 4s, right? So, things have 4 wheels or 4 legs, and it seems to be pretty sturdy, ways of organizing information. I want you to go through and imagine what would the 4 elements of exercise be, as an example. And you could just make this up, and there might be 3, there might be 7, but let's focus on the 4 that's going to make the biggest difference. And let's say, in the top left, you have stretching, right? On the top right, you have weight-bearing exercises, right? On the bottom right, let's say you have aerobic exercises, right? You see that? And maybe the bottom left, you have classes or different activities you could be doing to have good exercise, whether it's martial arts or it's yoga or it's dance or what have you, activities. And so let's say you go to the bottom right and you're looking at aerobic exercises, and maybe you could break that down into 4 categories. But do you see how that works? How you could chunk up? Now pull all the way back out and you see the big picture again, and you see the main 4 quadrants, and you're talking about health right there in the middle. In the top left, you have exercise. Maybe now in the top right, what is another element to health? Let's say nutrition, right? Nutrition. You want to get the right vitamins and minerals and nutrients in your body. So maybe the top right in that quadrant there, you make the middle nutrition. Nutrition. And let's say that's broken up into 4 categories, 4 quadrants, if you will. Kind of like a little origami, if you will. And where do you get your nutrition? You can make one of the boxes your diet, right? And you write your diet in there, and can you break that down into 4? You probably could, right? Your diet, maybe you put the 4 food groups, right? The 4 different food groups, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And let's say one of those food groups were, fruits and vegetables. And then you can break that down into different categories. Do you see that? So all of a sudden, you could have some little, if you keep on doing this, you could have some very obscure form of a goji berry or a fruit or a kind of asparagus, and you can see how it relates to that kind of vegetable, to nutrition, to your health, all the way up again, right? And so if you're looking at the top right quadrant and you know that's nutrition, and then the top left of that quadrant you have things like your diet. Maybe in the top right you have supplements. That's another way to get your nutrition, right? And you can break it down into supplements, and your supplements can be broken down in lots of different ways, right? You could have, let's say, broken that down into 4s, and you have vitamins, in your top right, and you have minerals in another quadrant, and you have your essential fats, essential fatty acids in another quadrant. And that could be something that could be useful, for you to be able to have. Maybe you have herbs in another quadrant as a form of nutrients. And then you could break down, vitamins down, to fat soluble, water soluble vitamins, however you like to do it. And again, you have some, you have something like, niacin related to B vitamins, related to this, to nutrients, to your overall health. And it's a way you can kind of capture all the information. Now, this is just me walking you through verbally because you've gone through probably the recall program or the thinking program or certainly the reading program, and we're doing this to exercise your imagination and seeing it on the inside so you can replicate it on the outside. Okay, and that's really what the next step is in the map. the next step in the map when we're going through this. And by the way, this mapping formula, when you're organizing, that didn't have to be health. That could have been sales, correct? It could have been public speaking, giving a great presentation. It can be any kind of category, specifically on the technical book that you're reading. And so you're going to the table of contents and you're mapping it out in a way, and you're organizing onto a piece of paper. And the quadrants is just one example. If you want to use mind mapping or any of the other note-taking different techniques and the thinking or the other programs that you might know of, but this is just kind of a nice structured way of doing it. And because you want to be able to see it, and I'm explaining it to you purposely and not putting it on a piece of paper for you in front of you or on the screen so you could see it in your imagination, because the E for map is review. And this review is I want you to actually go through and just review, kind of like look at the pictures again and the vocabulary words, and just kind of close your eyes, kind of rehearse everything, from A through D, if you will. Go through and just kind of remember your questions. Go through and sensitize yourself against the vocabulary again. Go through and just in your mind see if you can see some of those images and those pictures. And that's where you're taking what's on the outside and putting it on the inside. Because right now, I bet you, looking at the organize, if you want to review it, you would just kind of take it on the outside if you put it on notes and put it on the inside. So on your chapters, if you broke it down into like a skeleton or a structure of it, I want you to be able to imagine it inside your mind. Okay, kind of look at it, close your eyes, see if you can see it on the inside. And again, that's where real learning is happening, where you're taking the information, you're installing it on the inside so you can be able to apply it. And so you're reviewing it. So even when we talked about what we talked about for health, I bet you know what's in the top left quadrant, right, in your mind, because you rehearsed it and reviewed it, right? So you see there and you go through and you can see the different things that are there, whether it's exercise, and you can see the other side, which is, nutrition. You see the breakdown, but that's what you're doing for the map and you're reviewing it. Okay, so very, very, very good. Now that you have your map, notice you have not even read anything yet. That's the beauty of it. You have not even read anything yet. And what you're going to do in the next step now is you're going to actually go through and skim the information. You're going to skim the information. You're going to skim the information. Now, there's different ways of skimming information, but you're going to go through and basically skim the chapter. So if you're going through chapter number 8 of your anthropology book, or your sales book, or your health book, or your one on building a consulting business, or what have you, you're going to, now that you have your map, you're going to go through and you're going to skim, not read, you're going to skim and scan that chapter. And when you get to the end, you're going to go back to your original 5 things on your map and see if you can kind of build on it. Can you go through and do you know more of the pictures? Can you go through and define some of the vocabulary? Can you go through and maybe answer some of the questions, right? And so you're going through and you're going in and seeing the structure of it and just adding to your map even. Your map really is the organizing, the number 4 that was on your actual map. See if you can't build out and add more to it because you went through and you scanned or you skimmed it. Now the actual technique you go through it doesn't really matter, just the definition of going through it, and for mine, is just you're going through it faster than you would normally for reading. Okay, so you're going it quickly. So you could literally, one of the ways of doing it is just with our 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise, is go through it 3 or 4 times faster than you normally would. Okay, the other thing is you could use fancy finger motions. So for example, you could use like what they call the S method. The S method. And this is a common method that's taught sometimes in speed reading programs. Now, I wouldn't call this a speed reading program maybe, because you miss the things that if your finger is going across a line like this, then it's missing big gaps of information, right? It's missing, you can see in the top right and the bottom left how it could just miss that information, but it gets part of it, and that's why people report that they get the gist of something, right? So you could go through the text of your nonfiction book or your technical reading, just make an S down the page, and you'll get bits and pieces, right? So that's what you're doing. Now you're saying, well, I'm not going to get a lot of comprehension. What you're doing again is you're priming your mind, and this is such an important distinction. You're priming your mind for the real answers. Because when you're reading through, you might not know what the answer is, and I hope you don't. But what you created for yourself are a bunch of questions that you didn't have to begin with. Let's say you're going through and you're reading a story, and you honestly, you're scanning it, so you don't know if there was a prince or there was lots of princesses, and you're not really sure, but your mind is going to want that closure. So when you actually read the information, you're going to get so much more out of it than if you just read something twice. Let me say that again. There have been people, that have reported better results by skimming something once and then reading it, as opposed to reading something twice. Now, the interesting thing is, what takes less time? Actually skimming something and then reading it than reading something twice. Now, why would you think somebody would get better test results or recall on something that's skimmed and then read rather than something that's read twice? Is because when you're skimming and scanning, you're creating lots and lots of questions, right? And you're creating a situation where you just don't know. And it's kind of like rapid confusion. Like if you're thrown into the ocean and you don't know how to swim and you're just willing to grasp onto anything, it kind of puts you in that kind of flustered state. So when you actually read, it's like, wow, there's an answer. There's something I could grab onto. There's something I could grab onto. So you're priming your mind to be even a little bit confused, because often I found in my life, and I don't know if it's been your experience too, is sometimes it's darkest before the dawn. That sometimes in my most confused state, that's when I'm really ready to learn something, because my mind is open and it has questions and it wants to resolve that kind of what they call cognitive dissonance. The cognitive dissonance meaning that there's a gap between where I am and what I want. And because it feels uncomfortable, I will do anything to be able to feel more comfortable. And that's where, that really primes me for really good learning. Okay, so S method. Now, if you're not doing the S method, you could do the center method too. You could just take your finger, and I know a lot of traditional speed reading programs will take your finger and go straight down the page. The challenge is you miss everything in the left margin and everything in the right margin, but still it's a useful skimming tool, I find. Maybe it's not where you're really reading it, but you're still getting something out of it, because your peripheral vision, you could pick something up on the left and the right, depending on your fixation. When you're focusing on a specific word, usually you can see a word or two on the left, word or two on the right. You might not see a whole sentence or the whole line, but you could get the gist. And you're taking your finger and skimming in the chapter. Again, you're going through your map and you're taking your finger, you're just going down the page, down the page. And again, you're not going for comprehension. You're getting some comprehension, but it's not complete. All right, and so, or you could do the single line method. And this is kind of interesting. This is a single line method. This is actually, how you're reading right now. You'll find in today's competitive marketplace, you're underlining and you're coming back, and then you're reading the next line. Before a seller, we must need to sell ourselves. Do you want to stand out from the competition and be more memorable in your business? One of the greatest first impression business skills ever developed is the ability to meet a person and remember his or her name. This is actually out of a series of articles I wrote on these subjects. But here, skimming, this would actually be reading how you're reading, right? But skimming could actually, imagine going this way, reading the first line forward in today's competitive marketplace, and then going and reading the second line backwards. We service our product, our sell, we before. Now people are like, what's going to confuse me even more? Again, confusion leads to learning. But here's what happens. When you go one line forward and one line back, one line forward, one line back, you're quote-unquote reading how much faster? Twice as fast. Now, I know if you're doing this, if you're going at a certain rate, it's been my experience and the experience reported by a lot of our students, it's about 1,000 words per minute, that when you're going really quickly, then the speed, if you're going quickly enough, then you could actually, some people have reported good comprehension actually reading backwards, because, and now this you could hypothesize for a number of different reasons, but because they're capturing like the whole line, in a heartbeat. So it doesn't matter, like you look at a painting in your home or a photo in your home, you're not looking at it from left to right or right to left or up to down or down to up. You're getting the whole gestalt, the whole image, right? And so here you're going forward and back, and if you're doing it quickly enough, you're kind of getting that whole image in like one shot, if you will. And so if you're going forward and back, that's another way you could scan. You read one line forward, one line back, one line forward, one line back, and that would be a single line method to be able to read faster. Or you can do multiple lines. So there's no right or wrong with skimming. It's really like, and people ask all the time, how fast do you read? And the answer is it varies, right? You could read some things let's say, if you're reading, the average person reads 200 words a minute, and let's say you finish this program at like 600 words a minute or 500 words a minute. You don't read everything at 500 words a minute because we're all variable, right? And variable is power. It's like, we don't, if you play golf, you don't play with the same club every single time. The stroke might be very, very similar, but the club and the power and the force behind it changes, right? Same thing with your reading. You could read as fast as you want to read and slow down when you want to be able to slow down. And that's the power. When you come across some information that's more dense or requires more of your attention or focus or concentration or your level of attention, you could slow down. And so it's always variable. So even when you're skipping words or scanning, if your intent is, some people read the newspaper, for example, and they don't need to get every nuance and detail. They just want a nice aerial eagle-eye view of the material. So you read with purpose. Okay, so here you could skip 2 lines if you want, if you're scanning or skimming. The whole idea here is just, you have a finite amount of resources in terms of time and focus. And how do you want to be able to spend it will determine, how you want to actually use these techniques. So forward, back, that would be an example of skimming. Okay, so now after you're done skimming, you could go back and say, revisit those pictures, revisit those questions, revisit the organization, meaning your notes on the chapter, or even going through and trying to answer some of the questions yourself, and that would be the process of it. And then the third thing you do is you read. And this is your real payoff, if you will. If you went through and you actually built a map and you actually skimmed everything, when you actually read, you are so primed to go for and learn stuff, and you're so wanting, you've trained your nervous system to be really responsive in terms of your high level of responsiveness to be able to answer these kind of questions. So you've seen a lot of different images, you asked a bunch of questions, you looked at the main building blocks, which is really the bricks of a wall of comprehension, the vocabulary. You've gone through and you've organized the chapters so you kind of know the structure of where everything is laid out. You've kind of skimmed through everything to see the areas that are really important, because I think the fastest way to read something is not to read it at all. The fastest way to read something is not to read it at all. And sometimes skimming something or scanning it is the fastest way to read something, because sometimes you got what you want out of it and you don't actually have to read it. And that's the thing. You don't have to read it. So you go through and that's the process. I mean, it's really that simple and that straightforward. And so you go through, and the third step again is you go through and you actually read it. You get to go through and you use your finger and you read, and that's where, like, oh, there's an answer. Oh, there's some clarity. Oh, there's where I could yield and fix some confusion. And then that's where your payoff is. That's where your reward is. But then all of a sudden, all that information is now yours and you own it. And because you've gone through it in a way, you've structured it in a way that's more how you organically learn something, and it comes more naturally and more quickly and more sustainably after that. So absolutely fantastic. I would put down below how you're going to really use this, how you're going to apply it. I would recommend you apply this right away with anything that you're practicing. Now, here's your assignment. If you want to take things to the next level, this is what you do. Continue practicing your 4-3-2-1 if you haven't done it religiously over the past 21 days. Or if you want to take things to the next level, you can always take things to the next level, because your mind is like your body, and you can never regain the original dimensions once your mind is stretched by a new idea or a new practice. So practice that. Go read something for 4 minutes, then read the same thing in 3 minutes, then read it in 2 minutes, and then 1 minute. Then it'll be unbelievably powerful. If you want another quick tip, use a metronome. A metronome that goes, and then use that as a visual pacer, as you're underlining the words, and then maybe speed it up and you're going faster and faster, faster and faster. But practice this. Next, test yourself for 1 minute to find out how fast your reading speed is, and then I want you to read for a full 5 minutes, at that new pace, so it's comfortable. And record, take notes, answer your 4 W's: who, what, where, when does this take place? Take notes, and also relate. Talk for a few minutes about what you just read with another person, or talk to a recorder, talk to your phone, talk to me, in the session. Go back to previous sessions, and you could go through the 4-3-2-1 right in this in previous sessions, and practice that with me and relate. And then on top of it, continue reading. Just continue reading, and then your best performance at your ending performance of one day is your starting performance of the next. So unbelievably powerful. And then chart your practice, right? You want to chart, because what you measure you can manage and improve. What you measure you can manage and you can improve. And then practice your map. Practice what we just covered in the last session. Whether it's the newspaper reading or the magazine reading, or breaking things down and looking at your map, which means your pictures, which means your words, which means your questions, which means your actual map itself, the organization part, and reviewing it. Practice that, because again, practice makes progress. Practice makes progress. And I want to congratulate you. And I want to say that this is not just the end, but this is the beginning. Because leaders are readers. And the fact that you're just even here with me right now, being present, listening to my voice, I know you're a champion. I know you're wearing a cape, because you're a real superhero. Because you're, again, for the few who really complete things versus the many who could just complain about things. And and you have my utmost respect for being able to do that, to be able to invest in yourself, to be able to learn more, to be able to grow more, so you have more to be able to give. So I encourage you to not make this the end, but really the beginning. Review different sessions here, take things to the next level, create a book club, really love and reconnect to that, or rediscover that love of reading. Because again, if somebody's created their life, and they became an expert in the field, and you could sit down in a couple of days, you could compress decades of their experience and their learning and their lessons into just an afternoon or in days. It's an amazing gift, that you don't have to go through trial and error. And you could go out there and be able to take things to the next level, to enjoy fiction reading again, to be able to enjoy the power of story and the power of prose, to be able to share all this information, and then also, if you're not already, to be a writer of your own. On a personal level, I think books. They sometimes say in seminars that books are business cards, and or brochures, and I could not disagree more. I think a book for me is sacred. It's like books create movements. Books and just reading, the ability to do that, opens up opportunities for people and possibilities for people, allows people to enter new worlds that people didn't realize existed. It allows you to try on new minds and new possibilities, to go out there to do things that you never thought was possible before in your own life. And when we share a book, for example, with another person, it's the gift that really begins giving. It keeps on giving. Because with a lot of things, it's like, you give me $1, I give you $1, we have the same dollar. Nothing much has changed. But if I share with you a new idea, and you share with me a new idea, all of a sudden we have 2 brand new ideas. And with that, we can do some amazing things together. So again, congratulations, Quick Reader. Thank you so much for being with me, on this journey. I look forward to catching you in the flow, and to be able to sharing time with you. Again, until then, I wish your days be full of lots of life, lots of laughter, lots of love, and of course, lots of learning.